Welcome to Let's Talk with Dr. Robin. In this podcast, topics will be discussed that promote the daily management of life. While this information is meant to supplement your journey towards healthy emotional well-being, it is not intended to take the place of seeing a licensed mental health professional. I am Dr. Robin C. Wiley, a licensed clinical social worker with a private therapy practice in New Jersey. Thank you for joining today's conversation.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, or maybe good evening, depending on when you're watching. I welcome to Let's Talk with Dr. Robin. I am Dr. Robin C. Wiley, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker. And I'm so happy to say that this is my first time having a guest on the show. Usually, it's me talking about a topic. And I'm really happy to have this colleague of mine, someone I consider a friend. I've known her for a very long time. We met in the most interesting of places. And it's ironic, the conversation that we're going to have today, because even though it's like full circle. So allow me to introduce Dr. Nicole Sesay. And she is here to talk. She's an educational leader and an author. And I want to make sure we're going to definitely plug her book. She has a chapter in a book. The chapter is entitled Coming Out of the Dark. And the book is entitled Black Women in Educational Leadership. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the book. But first, Dr. Nicole, welcome. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here, Dr. Robin. And I do agree with you. It feels full circle from our interesting experience several years ago, and very excited to join you. I'm very excited about the work that you're doing in the social workspace and the work that you're doing to really build mental awareness, mental health. And I'm glad to join you today.
So, you and I had a conversation, and
Yes.
certainly, we've had a couple of conversations, and I thought about, the work that you're doing. And so one of the things, when I was thinking about like what to call today's show, how would we title it? And kind of what I thought about was this idea of what came to mind was finding ourselves after the hurt.
Mm.
And so, a while back, I remember it's a few years back, people were talking about this idea of like church hurt. And
Hmm.
so it made me think of, kind of what we're delving in today is more about work hurt.
Yes.
And, so this idea of that, of course, many of us, worked in various agencies and that kind of thing and have dedicated our lives to working
Yes.
for others and trying to help and working within spaces that we felt like, this would be our, beginning and end. This is our retirement, whatever the case may be. And then things occur that sort of maybe take us off of that journey or, some experiences that even I would even venture to say can be traumatic in nature.
Sure. Yes.
So let's get into this conversation. Tell us a little bit about what prompted you to contribute to the book Black Women in Educational Leadership, and what will readers discover in your chapter?
Yes. So thank you for that. So a while back, I had seen an advertisement, coincidentally enough, on LinkedIn, where there was a conversation around this topic of Black women in educational leadership. And I am that. So having been a school principal, assistant principal, an executive director in the nonprofit that I was working at, and now a district leader in the school district um, I- I'm working in, I was very compelled to, really out of curiosity, I was very curious about what is it that they were trying to unveil with this idea of Black women in educational leadership, specifically knowing my journey and my story. So I went to the interest meeting with the idea of wondering, were these folks really wanting to get real? Because the experiences that I have, that I know I want to be able to share with others was not going to be a cookie cutter approach to sharing my story. So I was very curious around what they were trying to get at. So along the journey, um, it was synergy. Once I heard about the book, was able to go to the interest meeting, it was very clear that I was aligned with the idea that women, Black women specifically, encounter a lot of trauma, as you said, in the workplace for a variety of reasons. And I thought it was important to be able to tell my story. You know, while it is rooted in my experience in the workplace as a woman of faith, it is also intertwined with the idea that once you walk in your own healing, walk in your own self discovery, walk in your own acceptance of situations that have happened, it's important to go back and help someone else. So
Mhm.
when I thought about your question around what will readers discover in my chapter, and my greatest desire would be a blueprint. When I went through the experience that I encountered, quite frankly, I did not have someone there to help guide me. I had people there who were emotionally invested in me, who loved me deeply, but that was not what was needed. It was needed, but it was not what was going to carry me to the next place in understanding when an event like that happens. So my hope is to really be that for someone else. So, when I think of, acceptance, when I think of forgiveness, when I think of self-discovery, I explore these tenets that myself first was a partaker in to bring me to the place of being triumphant after travesty with, I mean, tragedy, I mean, unbelievable cruelty that I experienced, and I wanted to be a helper for someone else who might be encountering an experience that is a life-altering trial, and I want to be able to help them become as triumphant as I walk today.
And I know we're not going to give away everything in the chapter because we want
Yes,
people to get the book and we
yes.
want them to read the chapter. And I know I'm excited about it. I pre-ordered mine.
Thank you.
Because even though I do certainly, inadvertently work in education too, as a college professor. But one of the things I think about is this story, even though it's kind of specific to education, it crosses over in
Yes,
any
yes.
field that you're working in. And I think as Black women professionals,
Mm-hmm.
however we want, professional Black women, however we want to say it, that it is a common story. It's something that many
Yes,
of us have experienced. Again, like I said, you're on a journey. You're in your career. You have excellent, reviews and standing and very well known with amongst your peers and that kind of thing. And something happens, maybe it's a mistake, maybe whatever it is. And
yes,
unfortunately, that is used to paint the entire picture.
yes,
Um, and it's very concerning how oftentimes, a lot of the work hurt, I should say, that happens is amongst our, not just our peers in terms of um, profession, but also to our fellow Black women
sure.
that, a lot of times this happens too. And so I wonder, how do you feel like, before we get into more about those three pillars, because I definitely want to talk about that because that definitely
Yes,
stood out to me. Um, how do you feel like you managed overall to like adjust to the change in your journey? Because I know it was a shift for you.
sure.
How do you feel like you managed that? Like, how did you
Yes,
manage that? How did you manage that adjustment? I know you were saying like having you had a support system, and I can understand it because it's kind of like a support system that may not necessarily fully understand what you're going through
yes,
because they
yes,
may not have experienced it at
sure.
all or what have you. So how do you
Yes.
feel like you manage that?
So, quite honestly, Dr. Robin, poorly at first, because my identity was so wrapped up into others' views of me as a successful fill in the blank. And
Mhm.
quite frankly, when I reflect on those experiences, my work was where I sought and found validation. And I found a lot of security in the knowing that even if other aspects of my life were not as, um, you know, desirable or as where I wanted it to be, certainly in my personal life at the time, I found a lot of solace in knowing that I was an effective leader, an effective educator. So I already started the journey misguided because my identity was so wrapped up into how others viewed me. And that alone allowed people's view to then be my barometer of if I was successful, and particularly when you encounter in a workplace traumatic experience. So that's the first thing that I recognize, that I didn't handle it well because I had already put myself in the position to not view myself as the person that I am, and that is separate from the workplace.
Mhm.
But as the journey began to really unveil itself, and I began to go through those pillars that we're talking about, as I like to say, the blueprint, I began to become more aware of me as a person, separate from what I could offer a workplace, what I could, quite frankly, what I could offer my family and friends. I began to step back, and that experience afforded me the opportunity to really do some self-discovery. Okay, go ahead, Dr.
No,
Robin.
no, I was just gonna say no because I want to say because you make such you're making so many good points here.
Yeah.
So one of the things I want to kind of hone in on the idea of identity because I think that
Yes.
is so important because and I think certainly this is for everyone, men and women do this, but women in particular, and I think a lot of times professional women like, and one of the things you said, your identity
Yeah.
was really wrapped up in your professional self. So
Sure.
I know I always talk about like there is the professional and the personal self, right? And not to
Yes.
say that they're completely separate, but oftentimes one sort of takes a back seat to the other.
Sure.
And so a lot of times those of us, because I said to you, those of us who, may have really focused on our, education, career development and that kind of thing, we tend to identify in that way. And it's like, hey, you know what? This is
Yes.
who I am. I've made great strides in this area. And it's not to say that, we don't make strides in other areas of our life, but this becomes our focus.
Sure.
And so, and one of the things, and I think we all have to think about too, is when our identity is wrapped up in our work.
Hmm.
And, at some point, we no longer are working because, we
Yes.
retire and that kind of thing. And it kind of, so that's kind of why it resonates with me too, because I know I do a lot of that work with my older adults when we talk about retirement and how you have to
Hmm.
like or almost like reinvent yourself. And that's a
Absolutely.
struggle because we don't prepare for that. We don't prepare for
Yes.
how our identity can shift. And in your circumstance, in this situation, and many times for many of us, where we have that a workplace situation that sort of derails what our plan was,
Yes.
what that journey that we were on, right?
Yes.
And now there is this need to like, well, wait a minute, who am I now? Because, like you said, if my identity is wrapped up in work, then if someone is thinking I don't do that well or accusing
Yes.
me of not doing it well or whatever, then who am I?
Yes.
You know what I mean? And that is that can be a very
Yes.
rough place to be in because we have put kind of all our eggs in that basket.
Absolutely.
And now we feel like, okay, wait a minute, how do I come back from that? But I do
Yes.
want to say, Dr. Nicole, that I know you're saying, like, well, I managed it poorly. But, and I know you and I in our offline conversation, we talked about this because I have a situation, not so much like, but I have a situation where I had really kind of thought, okay, this particular job, I was like, this is it. This is where I'm going to retire. This is my dream
Yes.
job and all of
Sure.
that. And then, the company made some changes
Hmm.
and then they downsized my position. And next thing you know, I had no job.
Yeah.
and and it was, I'm saying downsized, but it was, it was definitely, they fired me. and
Sure.
and then and it was very much some other stuff going on. But
Sure.
whatever. We won't go there with it.
Yes.
However, and I think, and let me know if you feel this too, it was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Sure.
So
Absolutely.
even though we can say, okay, you can say, well, I handled it poorly, but it's that idea that those challenges that we have in life,
Yes.
if we take the moment, because sometimes it does, it takes, we got to sit for a second.
Yes.
Sometimes there's some tears, there's all kinds of feelings that come up, but oftentimes you realize, like, if that hadn't happened,
Absolutely.
you know what I mean? Then I can say I wouldn't be here having this conversation with Dr.
Yes.
Nicole
Absolutely.
Sesay.
Yes.
And also, too, that with this book coming out, and also, too, this idea that you're using your experience,
Yes.
as you're using your adverse experience
Yes.
to now empower others
It's
because
so true.
you were empowered,
Yes.
and you empowered yourself.
Yes. Yes. It's so
So,
true.
yeah, I mean, and that's remarkable. That's a wonderful thing.
Yes.
I know my own thing. Like, if that hadn't happened, I would not have done the things that
Yes.
I'm doing now. I would have never done that because I wouldn't have had a reason.
Absolutely. Yeah, because it's interesting that because my identity was so wrapped up in the work that I was doing, quite frankly, I didn't see myself beyond that space. And what I have come to understand about identity is not only are you seeing yourself through the eyes of others, you begin to seek so desperately their approval, their
Mhm.
accolade, their stamp, of success. And what I've come to understand is that often will hinder your right judgment, you being able to listen very specifically to your instincts. It became a ending cycle of me looking for external validation from others, from, accolades that I absolutely received, that
Mhm.
had been a very successful principal, had been mentoring other principals, who came into the district doing great work in the community, that I serve. And it's interesting that you say, yes, when I look at it at the beginning, why I recognize that it was not as an effective approach that I want to be able to share with others is that it took some time for me to rid myself of the identity that had been crafted by the eyes of people who never really saw me. So it took so long for me to be able to say, I am not the accolade that they give, and I am not the criticism. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm not self-reflective, that people who are in my circle who want me, who wants, people who want the best for me, that I'm not looking at their constructive criticism. But the reality is, my journey at the beginning was heightened with a lot of tension because I could not wipe myself, I couldn't rid myself of the reality that I was not who they were calling me to be. I was not in the place to be able to walk in the truth of knowing who I was because my identity had become so wrapped up in their perception of me. So it did take months, and my chapter talks about weight gain, anxiety, anxiety attacks, the reality of like is someone going to first, when I meet them, are they going to talk about this situation? I mean, I was filled with a level of anxiety and pressure, sleepless nights. It was heightened because I could not separate Nicole from who people were saying Nicole was and is during that time.
So the one thing certainly I'm pulling from that also is this idea there was an emotional toll, there was also a physical toll,
Yes.
the impact of this experience, and
Yes.
the idea of, which I think you make such a great point here, where when our identity is so wrapped up in what other people think of us,
Sure.
Their validation of us, right? And I know I deal with this with clients all the time with this idea of, social media and all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
how they use those platforms to validate. We use those
Yes.
things to validate us when we're doing, if we're doing well, everybody's in your corner and saying, "Hey, you're doing a great
Yes.
job." But it also can work the other way,
Absolutely.
is that we feel so if my identity is wrapped up in specifically what people think about me and how I'm doing or not doing, then
Yes.
it can be very defeating also. It can be
Absolutely.
rewarding and validating, but also defeating at the same time. Now, let me ask, because I know certainly you had a lot of feelings during this time. Like you
I
said, this
did.
was a few months. You know what I mean? You talk about
Yes.
the anxiety and just the
Sure.
stress of all, like not sleeping and all those kinds of things. And also just like trying, and I'm sure, just trying to navigate the reality of
Absolutely.
this situation because it's almost
Yes.
like, I'm sure at some point you're like, how could this be happening to me?
Absolutely.
Like that's, you kind of
Absolutely.
like, how could this be happening?
Sure.
And so it makes me think about a lot of conversations that people are having in various circles. It's this idea of specifically for Black women
Sure.
that oftentimes as Black women, we do not take the time, give ourselves permission to
Yep.
feel,
Yes.
to feel the feelings. When
Yeah.
something happens, and don't get me wrong, so it can be us not giving ourselves the permission, but it can
Yes.
also be people who are in our circle also kind of convincing us, oh, you'll be okay, or push
Sure.
through, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
And and it's kind of like, we get portrayed Black women as this, we just are, it's like superwoman,
Sure.
we
Yes.
can handle anything and we don't have time to feel. And and I know I've talked about this in some other podcasts, this idea of we need to recognize where those things come from.
Sure.
And that certainly comes from, slavery. It
Sure.
does, the
Yes.
in the just unspeakable acts and things that Black women in particular had to go through,
Yep.
and not having the time,
Sure.
just absolutely just not having the time to feel,
Yep.
to experience what it is like to even to feel sad or any of that. And so to me, that has certainly, and I mean not just to me, but there's research that has been passed down.
Yes.
And so unfortunately, in a time now where we talk about mental health so much more, and but we still have kind
Yes.
of this, I would say, more implicit message of,
Sure.
I can't be sitting around crying. I can't admit that I'm defeated. I
Yes.
can't admit all, because I think it's brave of you and it's amazing. You're even that you put in a book. You're saying, look, I had anxiety, I was
Yes.
dealing with weight gain, I was dealing with
Yes.
sleeplessness, all of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That are natural reactions to what has happened. Those are
Yes.
natural reactions to what has happened to
Sure.
you, the experiences that you've had.
Yes.
But do you feel that, you know, how that because of did you feel like less likely, let me say it this way, did you feel that there was some pressure on you to get over it, to not feel what you were feeling, to sort of maybe minimize your feelings because of sort of this implicit message of, as a Black woman, we have to be stronger than that?
Strong, yeah. So what I would lean in first is I did my dissertation work around women empowerment. And while my dissertation work was about 7 years removed from the my experience at this particular school district, it did enlighten me to the experiences that I encountered. In one, that it has become such a customary approach that women are not empowered in workplace spaces. That's number one. So while we lean into a Black woman space, my research unveiled that it's women, period.
Mm-hmm.
Often women are put in positions, what a theorist calls the glass cliff, where after there are many, many issues that might happen in an organizational structure, and when there's no other option, a woman is called in to support the change. This glass cliff phenomenon is this idea that women are very rarely set up for success, that
Mm,
they are expected to do the impossible. And often the impossible that they're expected to do is with a lot of oversight and micromanagement that might not have been emulated with their male counterparts, black and white, or the
mhm,
glass ceiling approach where women are only at a can only rise to a certain point in the organizational structures in which they lead. Why I say that is when I began to really look at the trend of the particular school that I was working in, it was well known that that had been a very difficult and challenging environment. Um,
mm,
and when I think about what was really provided me to be successful, it just so happened that I am a person who was organized and well invested. You know, I came from that community. So a lot of my success came from a lot of those tenets. But when I think about what is actually needed for any person to be successful in such a place, I had not been afforded that opportunity. So when I began to look back, I began to understand that, quite frankly, I had not been set up for success
mhm,
at the onset. That's number one. Then number two, I have come from historically in my family, this idea of never let them see you sweat. So I had internalized this idea that it was weakness to show that someone's mistreatment of you was unacceptable. Dr. Robin, I had very little boundaries. So there were things that I had encountered early on in my tenure at this particular organization, long before it was exacerbated, that it would have been helpful for me as a woman, as a professional, as a person to have been very clear about my boundaries, my professional boundaries. So I had internalized this idea that there was no room for me to show feelings or to show what was unacceptable behavior because I had been trained to think that that was a sign of weakness. So I was often very robotic. I was often
mhm,
very
mhm.
monotone. I was often very skilled, but it lacked the humanistic element because I was always on script and always on program. So the authenticity of me had been quailed because what I was encountering, I did not want them to see beyond what was under the armor. And
Got to
if
show you can handle everything, right?
exactly, and
Yeah,
that
so
we're
that
like
feeds
super
into it.
women.
Yeah, that feeds into right. That is it. It's
Yes,
that idea that nothing put on us we can't that we can't
yes,
handle. Um,
yes,
and I think a lot of times again, like I said, that's also projected onto us. So
yes,
whether we know that we can handle everything or not, we're like, well, this is what I got to do. You know what I mean?
yes,
And by the time we recognize that, okay, because to me, I mean, certainly you got out of this situation and you're in a different
yes,
place. But for a lot of folks, whether it's the workplace or whatever it is, stay in these situations. And like you said, they're not
yes,
setting boundaries, not setting
yes,
boundaries. And it is killing us. You know what I mean?
yes,
Because it's causing us to have, medical, physical ailments, that type
absolutely.
of thing because we're just pushing through and not
Yes,
wanting to, because it even goes into not wanting to even say that you need help. Because one
absolutely.
of the things you're saying is like you felt like, women a lot of times are brought in to,
Oh, yeah,
take care of the situation or what have you,
sure.
and not set up for success.
Yes,
And that is a word, that is a phrase that, I know we use a lot, not set up for success and what that really looks like. And so, granted, you had your own skills that you brought to the table. So, and I
yes,
remember you are very organized, you're detail
yes,
oriented. I
yes,
remember all that about you and working with
yes,
you. And so, and those are great things. Those are great skills to have.
absolutely.
However, it doesn't take away from the fact that you need the support
Yes.
within the work environment, whatever that,
Absolutely.
because you can be doing all that, but it won't matter if the place itself is toxic and
Yes.
dysfunctional and all of that.
Absolutely.
And we know a lot of workplaces.
Mm-hmm.
I say, how we talk about, families can be dysfunctional, workplaces the same way, because a
Absolutely.
lot of the dysfunction
Yes.
are the same, under the same kind of core issues that
Yes.
we see in sometimes I see it in some of my work that I do with families, which is
Yes.
poor communication, inconsistency,
Yes.
and that communication piece, sometimes it can be communication is at the top and nobody
Sure.
disseminates it. You know what I mean? Or you get partial communication because you have people with egos that don't want to share the information or what have you.
Yes.
So there's so many things. And we're not going to talk about egos and all that other kind of stuff that
Sure.
happens, because a lot of times when someone's in a leadership role, there's somebody else who thinks they should have been in that role. And
Sure.
so therefore they're just plotting and waiting for your demise. So
Yes.
there's just so many things, so many things there. And I think about um, the not being set up for success, not having the adequate support.
Sure.
It's kind of like you're in a situation where you're only going to be able to accomplish but so much.
Absolutely.
And yet and still, a lot of times we're still on that wheel, right? We're still like, I
Yes.
can do it, I can get it done, even
Yes.
despite the odds.
Yes.
Because, and I'm glad you brought up sort of, because a lot of times you're right, we're raised in a way
Yes.
with certain, you know, ideals in terms of like the mentality that we bring
Sure.
with us into adulthood. Like, don't let them see you sweat. You know what I
Yes.
mean? You're strong. And in some ways, as Black folks, we have to have that armor,
Absolutely.
because we face so much.
Yes.
We face so many things, on a daily basis, just waking up Black.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So it's not even, we haven't even really done anything yet. We woke up Black and we're faced with a lot of things that are already working against us.
Yes.
And so I think that certainly feeds into this need that we have to also prove ourselves. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
To prove ourselves and to prove beyond what we think everybody in the room is thinking
Is
about
doing.
us.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes.
And a lot of us still are kind of operating on that. We have to do, 150%.
Yes, for
You know
sure.
what I mean? And so I think all of that tends to feed into, this I have to do it. I have to, no matter what's going on, I have to be successful.
Yes.
And like you said, going above and beyond, not setting boundaries, which is key. This
Yes.
is a key thing, is setting boundaries in the workplace,
Absolutely.
wherever we are, we have to do that,
We have
because
to.
the workplace will not set the boundaries for us.
No, at all. And if I
Not
can
at
add
all.
to a part of my research, explore the idea that the way that we mitigate that is the training. That often when we're looking at this phenomenon of the glass cliff and the glass ceiling,
Mhm.
specifically the glass cliff, what is often lacking when it comes to women empowerment is one, voices by women for women to help other women.
Mhm.
My research really showed how often men were becoming the spokespersons for women's experiences. And the second, when it came to empowerment, is that we cannot bypass the idea that there needs to be training, mentorship programs, women supporting each other. And quite frankly, Dr. Robin, this is a part of my next steps and what further research needed to show itself is
Mhm.
that had become and has been lacking in the spaces beyond education, quite frankly, in many organizational structures where that mentorship, that development is not there. It's almost
Right.
women, it's almost like women are plucked out, plopped into a role, and I can attest that was my experience as well. Plopped
Mhm.
in a role, and you are expected to work wonders in systems that have been historically failing. And
Right.
then you begin to wear this secret S, like you're, Clark Kent, and you're
Mhm.
going to, go into, the phone booth and then come
Right.
out and
Come
you're
out,
Superwoman and you can solve every
save the
problem.
world. Right.
Yes,
Right.
yes,
And it's interesting because you're right. A lot of times we get into these positions, and I mean, and there's another part of this because women aren't always helpful and great to other women.
Absolutely.
We are not.
Nope.
Um, and I know I can say that, sometimes we have some of the most negative experiences
Sure.
from our female counterparts.
Absolutely. Yes.
And I think that's something we don't talk about a lot. You
Sure.
know what I mean? We don't share that information a lot. It's almost like a little secret.
Yes.
But oftentimes women will make it, but don't reach that hand back to pull somebody,
Absolutely.
or they might do it in a performative way, but
Yes.
not when it really counts. And what
Absolutely.
happens is when we're going through these situations, women need other women, because the
Yes.
conversation that you and I are having, like I said, when you and I talked about this, I said, well, wait a second. I had to think about, I said, wait a minute, my own experience. I said, well, I've had experience that's similar,
Yes.
not to the level, but I said, but it still was something that
Yes.
shook me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it shook
Absolutely.
me. I was
Yes.
I was very much like, oh, wait a minute,
Yes.
where do I go from here?
Absolutely.
And a lot of times we are experiencing that on our own. And there were women that were at, that were in the crux of this, that were
Sure.
that were at the helm,
Yes.
guiding this situation. and
Yes.
and that led to me, not being at this agency anymore. And so, and it's very disheartening, especially when it is other women of color,
Sure.
Black women specifically.
Yes.
And so I think, we're also calling that out, because, we as Black women, we talk a lot about, oh, we need to uplift each other. And,
Yes.
and like I said, it could be, is it performative? You know what I mean?
Yes.
Don't say something just for social media. Let's mean it.
Sure.
And let's also, what does that mean in action?
Yes.
What is that? Because that might mean that you have to speak out against something that you see that's wrong, that you have to be
Yes.
an ally to a
Yes.
situation that you see. And oftentimes we are bystanders,
Absolutely.
and not realizing that it might have been you that day,
Yes.
but it could easily be me another day.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because as I have grown, matured, and developed, I've begun to understand the inner workings of many of these organizational systems. And while we might, seem modern, we might seem progressive, there are still underlying tones of a white supremacist culture. Now, as I was going through these experiences, I certainly was not evolved enough emotionally, certainly professionally. I mean, I was still trying to find my identity. But as time began to move on, and many of the pieces of the blueprint that I write about in this chapter began to evolve itself, I began to understand what often um I watch a podcast called the Behavioral Panel, and a part of this is like people who study behavior that talk about the organism does what the organism has always done, that gives
Mm-hmm.
that organism success. And that's what I began to understand about white supremacist culture, that underlying it has always been, way back in slavery, that there was a message that Black women should be separate in some way, whether it was by the basis of how you look, by the basis of education, by the basis of who was attracted to you. There has always been this undertone of divide. And what white supremacist culture does is it shines a light on what already exists. So when I look back in my experience, though there were people who did not look like me, who really created an environment that caused that situation to happen. Unfortunately, there were Black and brown women who were the catalyst of it. When I began to understand that, the culture desires historically for white approval, the culture desires for Black and brown people to look for validation from white culture.
Right.
So when I
White
began,
can be seen as the standard. White has
yes, the
been
standard.
historically, until and we don't realize, like, that standard
Exactly.
doesn't fit us.
Exactly.
It
So when
doesn't.
I began to look at what folks had done, I mean, and quite frankly, Dr. Robin, weeks and months later, some of those Black women certainly came back and apologized and admitted that it had gotten out of control, that they didn't think it was going to exacerbate itself now,
Mhm.
as it had done. Now, that was not great to
I was,
hear,
look, I was getting ready, look, and I know
and
we
I
got
didn't want to
look,
hear it.
we got a couple of minutes, and because we're this is part one. I just want to tell
Yes,
this is going to be part one. We got to have a part two because
yes,
we got to get to the pillars, and I want to
yes,
make sure we have ample time for that. But let me just say this: when people came back, because it's easy to come back after the fact. You know what I mean? It's
absolutely.
easy to come back and I didn't think it was going to go that whatever,
Yes,
and I do mean whatever
absolutely.
because I mean, I don't even. How did you manage that? Like, how were you like,
Yeah, and
it
what's so interesting, Dr. Robin, that was still early in my healing journey. So I still, and like I would be today, whatever, I certainly, it was hard to receive it. But I have to say that as the years have gone on and this has evolved, I began to understand that concept from the behavior panel. The organism does what the organism does. And
right.
that's what I began to understand. The organism is what the organism does. And what I began to understand that the same plagues that I was experiencing was also their experience, looking for validation,
Mm-hmm.
molding themselves to what they thought was the answer, even to the point where some of those folks were then mistreated themselves.
That's what I was going to say. So
Yes,
that's the thing. And I think this is a good time, kind of a wrap
yes,
up. Is one of the things to think about too is like you said, the organism's going to do what the organism does.
yes,
But also, too, people have a way of not recognizing that something is a problem
yes,
until it affects them.
absolutely.
So you see something happening to your black sister
Absolutely.
over here,
Yes.
and if people just stand by, like I said, the bystander type of thing, and you don't
Yes.
think that that could also happen to you.
Exactly.
And we know it to be true that if
Yes.
it will happen to it may happen in a different
Yes.
way, different
Yes.
time, it could be years down the road. But then all of a sudden people have this insight and this ability
Yes.
to reflect and say, oh no, because now they are a part of the other statistic.
Absolutely.
And it's really it's a it is that's a sad occurrence that we
Yes,
can't
it
be
was.
that we can't be empathetic if
Yes.
something is not happening to
To
us.
us.
You know what I
Exactly.
mean? That is
Yes.
really sad.
Yes.
But that unfortunately is an unfortunate part of humanity.
Yes.
Um, but I want to say just, certainly, I am certainly so appreciative that we have started this
Thank you.
conversation. I
Yes.
know we intend to continue this conversation.
Yes.
We still need to, like I said, we still need to talk about the three pillars,
Yes.
and get more into workplace trauma, which is occurring more than I think we would like to admit,
Sure.
no matter where you work at. Um,
Yes.
and it's crazy because when these situations occur, it takes away from the work that you're really supposed to be doing.
Absolutely.
Because the work here, we haven't mentioned anything going on with students. We haven't
Yes.
mentioned anything going on with, just kind of
Absolutely.
accomplishing educational goals,
Yes.
in terms of, with the future of the world. This is just about you being able to function in a workplace.
In a
And
workplace.
so I think your story, this story resonates with so many, and
Yeah.
I know that I see that coming into my practice. We see people coming into practice all the time, coming in for therapy, to talk about things that are
Mm.
going on at work that causes them to have to take, a leave of absence, or
Sure.
they are all their stress is related to their work environment.
Wow.
People that are forced to leave a job, whether it's early retirement, whatever the case may be,
Sure.
because of a toxic work environment.
Yes.
And something interesting too, I mean, certainly, you've done this work on yourself individually, and now you're trying to get this information out there to people
Yes.
so that they too can realize, at the very least, maybe try to identify other than by what you do for a living or the
Yes.
place that you
Absolutely.
work for, and seeking validation in other ways
Yes.
other than from your workplace. But the other piece of this is that, you know, people understanding that they're not alone and that you
Yes.
can come on the other side of this.
Yes.
You can have a different experience.
Yes.
And so I think, to me, this is a movement because this is the individual work, but really another part of this is we are failing workplaces,
Yes. Yes.
agencies,
Yes.
organizations, all of that.
Yes.
And especially, or I always like to say organizations that also seek to help others
Yes.
are sometimes the worst.
Yes.
Okay.
For
That
sure.
we're not trying to, there needs to be organizational change. There needs to be
Yes.
change in terms of how workplaces operate, how
Agreed.
administrators operate,
Yes.
because it's not working. And with the new worker, the new employee that's coming in,
Yes.
they are definitely not going to stand for that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Yes.
They're definitely not. So thank you so much, Dr. Nicole.
Thank
We will have you
you.
back. We will have a second part to this
Yes.
episode where we will finish the conversation. And until next time, everyone, be well, be great, be you.